What's up, War Report family? We are back with another great edition of the Auburn Express, powered by the War Report. It is Tuesday, and as always, joining me on Tuesday is my good friend Chris Phillips from SEC Unfiltered. Let me bring Chris in here. Chris, week 2 is in the books, and man, college football had some great upsets. Unfortunately, Auburn was a part of the upset gang. How's your week going, my friend? I'm happy to have you here.
Mike, it's going well, man. I appreciate you having me. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, I got a bone to pick with you, man, and a lot of Auburn folks as well. Because listen, I want to tell you something right now. I did really, really well on my gambling picks this past weekend, but I was sitting there, and Auburn wasn't an official play for me. But I talked to a few people, and I was like, I'm going to sprinkle a little something on Auburn minus 13.5. Everybody's really confident, feeling good. Maybe I was the kiss of death, but I looked up on Saturday and was like, what is going on? And Peyton Thorne's was what was going on. So, I'm no, either way. It was a great week, too, man. It was a great week, too, and we're starting to learn more and more about these teams. And although I say that, Mike, and I feel like I've got just as many questions I do answers at this point.
Chris, they say the old coaching adage is that the greatest jump or improvement is between weeks 1 and week 2. I don't think they accounted for people moving backwards from week 1 to week 2, but we're going to talk about that. As always, this is the SEC Unfiltered Power Ranking segment. Let's take a look at what you had last week and how you had movement this week. Chris, last week, you had Georgia in the number 1 slot. They did nothing probably to change your mind in week 2. Ole Miss 2, Texas 3, Bama 4. They struggled with USF for a few quarters, up until the fourth quarter in that game. Tennessee 5, Mizzou 6, LSU 7, Oklahoma 8. The Kentucky in the 9th spot. Auburn 10, obviously they're not going to stay there. Texas A&M 11, Vandy 12. They were the big mover last week, reminding everybody you had them last in the SEC. You moved them up. Arkansas 13 in a thriller against Oklahoma State, Mississippi State, Florida, and South Carolina, who logged the big win versus Kentucky, no longer in that 16th spot. So let's look at what you did this week. Georgia in the same spot. You moved Texas up a slot in front of Ole Miss. Interesting there. Talk to me really quickly about swapping those two.
Yeah, I was wildly impressed with Texas, Mike, what they did going on the road to the Big House. And I know people are going to look at that and say, Michigan's a shell of what they were last year. They're obviously not the same team. But what impressed me so much was the physicality of Texas and the way they just flat out bullied them. And I actually thought that was going to happen. I said I think I did say those exact words on social media mid last week. And some Michigan folks were dancing around in my mentions, giving me hell. And I may or may not, Mike, have taken my victory lap on Saturday. You got to take them when you get them.
Yeah.
But no, Texas was, it was just the dismantling of Michigan that was so wildly impressive. There were questions about them maybe on the defensive front, the interior defensive line. I think Texas getting ahead in that game early too. Really putting Michigan behind the 8 ball. We knew they couldn't throw the ball. We knew that wasn't the strength of theirs, but the way they contained Donovan Edwards, the way they just completely stymied Michigan's offense and stymied the rushing attack. Quinn Ewers played a beautiful football game. He was fantastic. That's what I wanted to see, was him go out there and kind of control a game like that. He had done it before, by the way. Some Texas fans gave me some heck for that, but talking to Texas folks for the season, they mentioned that, what's the next step of the offense? What do you most want to see? We want to see Quinn Ewers in games like that take over and be the best player on the field. And I think Quinn did that. And obviously he had a lot of great help around him with guys like Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden and Gunnar Helm, the tight end, who had a big game. But the physicality of Texas, and you win a game like that and you win it in that fashion, I gave Texas the nod ahead of Ole Miss. I'm still very high on Ole Miss. We're splitting hairs, Mike, at this point. But, again, you go on the road and get a big win like that, you deserve to move up a slot.
Beyond them, right, in that 4th spot, you've got Tennessee. Now, they were 5th last week. You moved them up a slot, and then you flip-flop them and Bama. So Bama dropped down after struggling with USF. Missouri unmoved, LSU unmoved, Oklahoma unmoved. And then here's where we start to see some movement from last week. In the 9th spot, you got Texas A&M. Kentucky was there. They obviously got absolutely obliterated by South Carolina. That earned South Carolina a move from 16th to 10. They took Auburn's spot at 10. Now, you moved Vandy. Actually, Vandy moved up a spot from 12 to 11. And beyond that, Arkansas moved up a slot. And Kentucky dropped down to 13. Now, Auburn, and this is where we want to spend the most time, of course, this segment. dropped all the way from 10th to 14th, behind the likes of Kentucky, Vandy, Arkansas, and South Carolina. Now, look, there's not a lot, Chris. There's those teams ranked in front of Auburn. I would not call impressive by any stretch, but you got to rank them week to week as you see it. And Auburn had a very sloppy win against the G5, well, Power 4 school, I guess, right? Cal feels G5-ish to me. It's
Mike, you're talking a lot of trash for a guy who just
listen,
golly.
Look, it was
listen,
terrible.
Auburn people didn't want to give, and I felt victim to it. Nobody wanted to give Cal even an ounce of respect. I don't think anybody even took that game seriously
because they're not more
like,
talented. Look,
we're like, uh-oh.
I'll tell you, they're not more talented, but again, coaching malpractice essentially will cause this. We've seen it. Doesn't matter how much talent you have. Jimbo Fisher showed us this at Texas A&M. You can have all the 5 stars in the world, but you can mismanage that talent to a point to where you become derelict in your duty to deliver a serviceable product for the fans who invest time and money showing up to games. Jordan-Hare Stadium was packed, Chris. They did kind of like a whiteout Penn State type thing. It was an amazing atmosphere. The Eagle was flying. Things looked good. That first drive by Peyton Thorne, he looked like he was going to win the Heisman. And then suddenly it all fell apart. So let's stay here because it feels to me like your drop of Auburn is about quarterback play, is it not?
It's associated with Peyton Thorne, yes. Coming into the season, Mike, I had Peyton Thorne 16th out of 16 SEC quarterbacks in my quarterback power rank. We could have spent some time on that one and probably run up the numbers as well on YouTube. But no, I mean, listen, I just was not a believer in Peyton Thorne. I'm obviously still not a believer. And, even today, on Monday, hearing Hugh Freeze talk about we're going to, condense the playbook and limit the packages. And I'm like, I didn't like that. The quarterback's not a freshman.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a guy. This is a veteran. Yeah, it's a 5th-year guy. I mean, I don't understand why Hugh Freeze wants to hitch his wagon to this guy. And I heard people that we are good friends with in the industry and I respect in the industry say, well, they didn't want to go get a quarterback because they're more than a quarterback away. Well, a quarterback might help you win another game or two, and that feels pretty important to me. That seems like that would be worth it. So
the quarterback can be the difference between the quarterback can be the difference between 6-6 and 8-4. Certainly.
Auburn will not reach their ceiling this season because of Peyton Thorne, and I hate that. Hate that
unless you bench him now before you get to SEC play. And this is what I hate for Hank Brown, who is the backup. If you're just joining us and you haven't watched us before, Hank Brown is the back. He's QB2. And if you're Hank, you're sitting here watching this. You've never started a major college football game. You played in one, essentially, which was the bowl game, and he played well. He went 7 for 9 for like 120-something yards in about a quarter and a half. And people said, we're blasting the wide receivers the whole game. And suddenly when Hank got in there, it was like, well, these receivers that you said couldn't catch suddenly were catching balls from Hank Brown. Now, our guy Aaron Murray, he's got a great YouTube channel, by the way. It's called Snaps. And they break down quarterback play. Obviously, he was a quarterback in this conference. I reposted a clip that went absolutely nuts on Twitter. Guys, go to my Twitter. You'll find it. I think it's like at 250,000 views or 300,000 views. But it was on the interception where Peyton Thorne got hit, Chris. And in real time, it felt like, well, he got hit and the offensive line gave up pressure, and that's why he threw it. But Aaron said, no, man, he was holding on to that ball way longer than he should have been. And that you got to get that ball out into the hash and stop waiting on the guy to get to the spot before you throw the ball. You got to throw with anticipation. Now, last year we were sold. He didn't do that because he didn't trust the receivers to be where they were supposed to be. Well, you upgraded by all measures. You cannot dump on the receivers this year. So maybe those guys last year took a little bit too much of the heat, which is what I was selling. Now, I know they weren't grade A, top shelf, but certainly I thought they were being made to look worse than they actually were. If you're Hugh Freeze, Chris, like in your mind, when do you pull the plug on Peyton Thorne? Because by all accounts, he could go out and look great versus New Mexico this Saturday. But does that mean, pardon me, but does that mean shit going into SEC play? Arkansas looks a little better than we thought they would.
Mike, we actually have talked about this game over at SEC Unfiltered on our YouTube channel, podcast, all that good stuff. And I mentioned that. I think he will look great. And I said the same thing you did. I don't think it means diddly squat. I don't think it matters. I mean, I hate to say that because, every game matters and every rep matters, but spare me the coach talk BS. It doesn't. Beating New Mexico, it proves nothing. I don't care if Peyton Thorne goes and throws for 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. It just doesn't mean anything. So, listen, if Peyton Thorne's going to start this football game against New Mexico, you got to get somebody else ready, though. Like Hank Brown needs to play. And I tell you, Mike, and I don't want to be right, by the way, for the faithful who are tuned in, but in the offseason, I picked Arkansas to pull the upset over Auburn.
You did. You did.
I was labeled a crazy person for even insinuating it was possible. Now, my picks are subject to change. Next week, I may have I may be singing a different tune. There are going to be games this year. We get more context, more information.
Stand on business, Chris.
I'm just saying.
Business. You said it.
I mean, especially Mike, if I'm there next weekend, which may potentially happen. The schedule's kind of up in the air, but I mean, I don't want to fear for my safety or anything on the planes, but I'm kidding. But I'm just saying that all of a sudden, to your point, like Arkansas, you noticed that you said they moved up a spot in the power rankings, which I don't normally do when a team loses, but I actually do feel it's weird. They choked that game away.
They did.
But like offensively, they're dangerous. I mean, over 600 yards. Jaquinton Jackson's a dude in the backfield. Taylon Green's got it rolling. Yeah. I mean, he's got it rolling. So, shoot, if you roll into that, I mean, if Auburn and Arkansas play this week,
why, yeah, I might pick Arkansas.
I mean,
not gonna lie,
it just because if it turns into an offensive shootout and a battle of quarterbacks, I'm going Taylon Green and Bobby Petrino.
Chris, pre-spring or during the spring before the 8A game, I went on 3-man front with our guy Pat Smith. Great guys, by the way. So shout out to 3-man front. And I said this on Locked on Auburn with my good friend Zach Blackerby. He asked me, let's go floor and ceiling for this team. And I said, pre-spring, I said ceiling 7-5, floor 6-6. I don't think there's any in between. I think that's right where this team falls. Auburn fans ate me alive. They were like, "Is this guy's a fucking Bammer?" And he doesn't like Auburn anymore. And I'm like, if nothing changes with this schedule, yes, because look at the road games. You could lose all of those. And then if you drop one home game, you're right there. It's 7 wins. Right? So it was hard. It was tough saying it, but it was. And then after the spring, I let the bug get to me. I let the enthusiasm get to me, and because it was clear how much more talented they were as a team. And I thought this might be good for raising that ceiling to 8 wins. But now I'm right back where I was pre-spring, and I've got a coach here that's saying it's really hard not to play the guy who is consistently the best player in practice. Now, here's something before we get out of here. I want to talk to you about a common sentiment among fans that, well, you're not at practice, and so do you think that the coach is not playing the best guy? And and I'm like, yeah, but no, not intentionally. But I think that coaches get this wrong sometimes. And talent evaluation is not an exact science. A guy can look great in practice, but not be a gamer. I think when Bo Nix was here at Auburn, he had that syndrome here and there. Looked great at practice, clearly the best at practice, but when the lights were on and the pressure was the greatest, didn't show up. Not at Auburn, he didn't. And then, here you've got Peyton Thorne, and he's been playing college football long enough, Chris, that, yes, he should be a phenomenal practice player. But how much more do you need to see in game after a whole year with him as a starter, and then this before you will pull the plug and put Hank Brown in? And remember, when Hank Brown got in the bowl game, Chris, he went in third. He was the third quarterback off the bench in that game, and he played the best. And who saw that coming? So he was maybe always better than Holden. And I like Holden Geriner. I think he's a great quarterback. I just don't think that this is the place for him. I thought he should have hit the portal. I don't think he should have spent another year at Auburn. But you already clearly misevaluated Hank Brown if you had him third on the list, based on what we've seen. Right? Is it a stretch to think you've misevaluated this situation here in practice between these two quarterbacks? What's it going to take to make a change? I think that the better coaches pull the plug before it becomes a disaster. Right? And my last example would be our guy Brian hates when I say this, but back in 2017, Saban pulling Jalen Hurts for Tua in the middle of a national title game is one of the best coaching decisions I've ever seen. Right. And now, honestly, both those guys ended up being NFL starters. As a matter of fact, Jalen went on to be an MVP type guy at the NFL level, but you pulled him. Right. And then you won. And then the guy that you pulled him for, like, he went and he threw a bomb in overtime to win you a national title. Some guys know how to do this, and other coaches struggle with this. How do you break that habit if you're Hugh Freeze?
That's a great question. To your point, you've got to be able to make sure you make that move before disaster strikes, because then it's too late. I will say, to your point, Mike, I want to echo this. I don't think coaches either, play favorites or they're intentionally not playing the best guy. Like I've heard that and seen that within fan base. And this is their guy. This is their livelihood. They're not just trotting. They're not knowingly trotting out a guy. They're like, I know he's not as good as so-and-so, but I'm playing favorites. I like him more than that other guy. Like, I don't think that's happening. If it is, that's true coaching malpractice. But I mean, to your point, some guys are great practice players and they get in the game and they piss down their leg. I mean, I just, there's no other way to put it. So to your point, at some point, it's up to us and it's up to Hugh Freeze. When somebody shows you who they are, you got to believe them.
Yeah.
And he's not going to get better. And here's the thing I would say too, Mike. I don't think Peyton Thorne, he probably won't play as bad as he played against Cal every game this year. It won't. But
for sure,
just the fact the floor is at that point. Is that worth the risk?
That's a great point. It's not about the ceiling. It's about the floor.
It's about the floor.
How bad can it get? Yeah.
Right. The best thing, it's like a pitcher in baseball. I just need to know what you're going to give me every outing. That's it. I got to know. I cannot win games with the guy that one night he is shut out and one night he can't throw a strike. Football, same way. The quarterback, the best thing they can do is raise their floor. Most of them, if you're at the SEC level, you have a pretty high ceiling. How high is your floor? Because, I mean, that's great. You can go out there and, you can have a stellar showing, and I'm sure Peyton Thorne could. But going into every Saturday knowing that disaster could strike, that's just not a great place to be, man. So even if a guy like Hank Brown, you know what? Maybe he's not a superstar. Maybe he's a game manager. But there's a reason you can win with a game manager. We know exactly what our guy's going to give us. We know how to build around him and work around him, play to his strengths, stay away from his deficiencies. You can go win a game that way. You can't go win a game when you have the up and down and the volatility that Peyton Thorne provides.
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult. Let's take a look one more time before we get out of here at the SEC Unfiltered Week 3 Power Rankings. Again, you dropped Mississippi State all the way to the bottom where they belong. Florida just avoiding that last slide at 15. Auburn just way too low. Now, obviously, I've always felt, and I said this when we did our first segment in this series, this is our third, that you're going to see a lot of movement between 9 and 16 throughout the season. That's where you don't know what you have. There's talent there. There's talent at A&M. There's talent at Auburn, right? You've got a great defense at Kentucky, but those schedules are difficult. And what you see in the top 8 are you see some of the most consistent schools over the last 4 or 5 years. Georgia obviously has got back-to-back national titles. Alabama has been a bastion of consistency under Nick Saban, but he's gone. Missouri, a second year straight here that they're looking like a contender. And Eli Drinkowitz, give him his flowers, man. Like, he's he's doing a lot with not as much talent as the other guys. Same as Lane Kiffin, consistently producing what less high school talent than most guys, but he never fails to find a quarterback every year. LSU loaded with talent. Brian Kelly's trying to put some things together. They didn't open good, but like I think you'd be a fool to write LSU off the rest of the season. And obviously Oklahoma has kind of been a perennial powerhouse in the Big 12. However, this is the new SEC, so we'll see how they do there. Brett Venables and his squad, to close this first year in a new conference. Chris, before we get out of here, Auburn versus New Mexico, man, how are you feeling? Give me a score prediction. I know it may be hard at this point, but does Auburn bounce back this week, or is it disaster 2 weeks in a row?
Well, I want to say this too, Mike, back to the power rankings just in closing. 8 through 15. I think Mississippi State's probably going to be in that 16 slot. But if you want to include them, dude, the whole bottom half of the conference, I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I mean,
flip a coin,
on a week-to-week basis, there's going to be shuffling. I just because all those teams have flaws and they're going to beat up on each other. So to your point, we still got a lot of questions we need answered, and we're going to start getting those, especially when we get into conference play. I think Auburn's going to bounce back in a big way. I've got them actually covering in the game.
Okay.
They're 28-point favorites. I mean, I think they win 44-7. Listen, like I told you, does it really mean a whole lot? Probably not, but I think Peyton Thorne will play better. I hope Hank Brown plays. I think, New Mexico, not a good team. This is not a good team. Let's not overdo this or overthink this thing. I think Auburn will bounce back. Night game at Jordan-Hare. It's homecoming, by the way, which I know you know. Yep. But, I think the team will be fired up to get back out there and put on a much better showing. And I mean, dude, you got to, man, it's as much a get right game as anything. SEC play is looming. And, this is your last opportunity to really, dot your I's and cross your T's and make sure you're ready to go.
Yeah. You got ULM later in the year, but there is a ton, their top 10 teams sandwiched in there. You got Oklahoma, you got Georgia, you got Missouri on the road, you got Kentucky still. I mean, before you get to another cupcake, you've got a bunch of potential adversity there, and we'll see how Hugh Freeze's team bounces back. We bounced back for week 3. Mike G and my guy Chris Phillips from SEC Unfiltered. Chris, before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, Mike, you're the man. I appreciate you having me on. At SEC Unfiltered on social media, X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're on YouTube. We're on podcast and secunfiltered.com. So anywhere you get your content, you can find us there at SEC Unfiltered.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of the Auburn Express, powered by the War Report. We'll be back next week with Week 4 Power Rankings. Me and my guy Chris Phillips from SEC Unfiltered. Until then, War Eagle.